Tonight we're stepping into a Paris that doesn't smell like fresh baguettes or spring roses. You're standing on a cobbled street at dawn. The lamps are flickering out, mist curls above the Seine, and the smell, oh, the smell. It punches you before you even blink. Think raw sewage laced with spoiled milk, crushed garlic, and something uncomfortably close to a dead animal. It's not just unpleasant, it's unrelenting. The kind of scent that doesn't just tickle your nose but grabs your throat and doesn't let go. Now, you probably won't survive this next bit unless you breathe through your mouth and accept the fact that most of Paris in the 1800s is best experienced from a safe distance. Or, your bed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, what's your location and what time are you listening to this? Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past shuttered storefronts and coal-streaked walls, careful not to step into last night's mess. And there's a lot of mess. Every gutter trickles with dubious liquid. You can't tell if it's rainwater, wine, or something more sinister, because in this city, even the rain smells suspicious. Welcome to 19th century Paris, a sensory overload of beauty, chaos, and unfiltered odor. The city's reputation for romance hadn't quite taken root yet. Right now, it's better known for its bodily stench than its love stories. You pass a horse-drawn cart delivering milk, but the horse relieves itself mid-step, splattering something foul across your boots. You keep walking. Everyone does. This isn't a temporary problem. For centuries, Paris has had a love-hate relationship with smells. But the 1800s, they crank it up to 11. With more than 1 million people packed into medieval streets, waste disposal is a fantasy. Chamber pots are emptied out of windows, some with a shouted gare lo as warning, others with no warning at all. It's like dodging buckets of doom every time you walk under a balcony. You duck under a crooked archway and come nose to nose with a street vendor cooking tripe over a coal fire. It could smell good if your olfactory senses weren't already in shock. The air's thick with competing notes of rot, smoke, grease, and dung. And you think, how did anyone live like this? Well, the truth is, they didn't have much choice. Cities back then didn't just smell bad, they were bad. The French Revolution might have brought ideas of liberty, but it didn't bring plumbing. That wouldn't arrive for decades. In fact, the average Parisian of the early 19th century lived without running water, sewage pipes, or waste collection. You were expected to handle your own filth, and most people simply didn't. You cross into a denser quarter, alleys like intestinal tubes winding between buildings so close you can shake hands with your neighbor through the window. Here, the smell gets stronger. Sour beer spills, sweaty clothes drying on lines, old onions stewing in pans, and always, the faint undercurrent of urine. Now, here's a fun, horrifying fact: Paris was still full of cesspits in the early 1800s. These were literal holes in the ground, beneath buildings, filled with human waste. And yes, they overflowed. Regularly. When they did, streets became rivers of what polite society called black matter. Historians still argue whether these cesspits actually caused more disease than the streets themselves, or whether they were just an especially pungent symbol of urban decay. It's not like no one cared. There were complaints, loud ones. Writers described the stink with near-biblical drama. Honoré de Balzac once wrote that Paris had as many stomachs as it had chimneys, and they all belched constantly. Doctors wrung their hands. Scientists preached about something called miasma, a theory that disease traveled through bad air, particularly the kinds of smells that clung to backstreets and swamps. And the common people? They joked about it, because what else could you do? When your shoes sink into mystery puddles daily, you develop a dark sense of humor. But even among all this odor, people adapted. You pause near a bakery, where fresh bread somehow cuts through the mire. It's the one good smell, and the baker knows it, his stall is packed. A stray cat slinks past you, looking disinterested and mildly offended by your scent. You can't blame it. The strangest thing is, despite the horror show bouquet hanging over every courtier, this city is alive. People laugh. Markets buzz. Couples flirt beside latrine-scented fountains. It's as if the stink is just another feature of Paris, like the language, or the fashion, or the existential dread. One especially bizarre detail: Parisians had a sort of social ranking for smells. The rich lived higher up in buildings, not just for the view, but to avoid the odor rising from the streets. The poor, crammed into damp basements and alley-level rooms, breathed in everything. You could tell someone's social class by how well they stank. There's no clearer example of olfactory inequality. You reach the edge of a canal, where a boy is fishing. You pray he's not planning to eat what he catches. Behind you, a manure cart rolls by, bells jangling to warn pedestrians of its approach. You don't step aside fast enough and get a splash of something warm on your coat. You sigh. It's going to be a long century. But hang in there, because this sensory nightmare sets the stage for one of the weirdest, most oddly specific government experiments in urban history. And it all begins with a smell. You turn a corner, and history clings to your nostrils like old wallpaper, layers upon layers, not all of them pleasant. That sharp tang of vinegar, it's from a pickler's stall. The sour milk smell, left over from a dairy that shut 2 years ago. The stronger, stomach-turning stench, probably coming from a cellar cesspit that hasn't been emptied since Napoleon was still stomping around Europe. Rot isn't new to Paris. It's inherited. The city's struggle with smell stretches far beyond the 1800s, rooted in medieval times when the word sanitation may as well have been a foreign language. In fact, back then, public streets were the source. Wastewater, food scraps, and human filth trickled down open gutters, pooling into sticky nightmares. In some neighborhoods, walking to church meant hopping over steaming piles of animal entrails. By the time the 19th century rolled in, Paris wasn't just stinking, it was fermenting in its own legacy. You wander into one of the oldest quarters, the Marais. The buildings lean toward each other like drunk uncles. Narrow alleys trap every scent like a wine bottle traps bouquet. You breathe through your scarf, but it's no use. A nearby leather shop has been tanning hides for centuries using brace yourself, dog dung and urine. And yes, that's still the process. You try not to think about it, but the smell doesn't give you the option. That's the thing, every odor you sniff is a relic. The medieval butcher shops that tossed their runoff into the Seine, their ghosts linger. The hospitals that bled patients into the gutters, still remembered by the pavement stains. The revolution, with its guillotines and overcrowded prisons, it left behind more than just trauma. You're smelling history literally decomposing in real time. By the late 1700s, the situation had grown so dire that even royalty noticed. Marie Antoinette reportedly demanded flowers be constantly placed near her at court, not for luxury, but to block the odor of Paris that clung to her gowns. Historians still argue whether the infamous queen ever actually said "let them eat cake," but they do agree she couldn't stand the smell of her own capital. Ironically, the Enlightenment brought a wave of philosophers and scientists obsessed with cleanliness of thought, body, and society, but not much changed at street level. Sure, people talked about hygiene. They published pamphlets. They launched campaigns. But implementing solutions? That was a different, and far smellier, battle. And then there were the rags. You pass a rag picker sifting through a pile of refuse. She's hunched, with sharp fingers and sharper eyes, selecting anything vaguely useful: cloth, string, bones. She moves fast, because competition is fierce. In Paris, rag picking is practically its own economy. These scavengers, called chiffoniers, are licensed by the city, allowed to rummage through garbage in hopes of finding something salvageable. The smell of their work is so strong it follows them like a shadow. They're essential, though. The chiffoniers keep the city from drowning in its own waste. But they're also feared, viewed as grimy, desperate, half-feral. You give the woman a wide berth, but she smirks. She's smelled worse than you. And then there's the revolution. Not just one, Paris has a bad habit of erupting into chaos every few decades, but the lingering aftermath of the French Revolution still taints the air in more ways than one. Barricades once built from broken furniture and dead horses weren't cleaned up overnight. Corpses rotted in the streets when cemeteries overflowed. And the prisons? Let's just say, they didn't have janitors. Some of the oldest Parisian smells are revolutionary ones: gunpowder, blood, fear, desperation. These aren't metaphors. People said they could smell the rebellion in the air. Scholars today still debate whether that's poetic exaggeration or psychosomatic truth. But when entire neighborhoods reek of smoke and spoiled food, it's hard to tell history from hallucination. Even Napoleon couldn't entirely escape it. While he rose from the ashes of revolution with a flair for empire building, his armies left Paris teeming with wounded veterans, broken infrastructure, and a population desperate for order. Smell was political. Cleanliness, what little there was of it, became associated with authority. Dirt and stench meant rebellion, poverty, danger. Fresh air. That was for the rich. In fact, you notice a strange pattern. The higher you climb up the hilly streets of Montmartre, up staircases to upper floors, the lighter the air becomes. It's not just geography. Smells settle downward. It's one of the few natural laws Parisians can rely on. So if you've got money, you don't just buy beauty, you buy elevation. That's why tenement dwellers live at street level, while the wealthy occupy the penthouses. Even the churches play a role. You duck into a dark, incense-scented chapel to catch your breath. It's cooler, quieter. But then you remember, these buildings double as crypts. Beneath your feet lie centuries of bodies. Paris's cemeteries overflowed long ago, and mass graves were built beneath churches. In some cases, corpses were packed so tightly that the soil itself turned to jelly. Yes, that's a real thing, corpse wax, they called it. You step back outside. It's not all death and decay, though. Paris still dazzles. You glance up and see ornate balconies, birds darting between rooftops, women in colorful skirts laughing as they haggle for fish freshish from a street vendor. Life flourishes here, in spite of the stench. Maybe because of it. The smell reminds everyone of what they've survived. You wonder, idly, what it would take to clean this place up. Not a bath, Paris needs a rebirth. And somewhere, someone in power is starting to think the same thing. Because the city may be rotting from the gutters up, but it's also waking up to the idea that maybe, just maybe, it doesn't have to smell this way forever. You've barely escaped the fish stall's aroma, equal parts brine and despair, when it hits you again, that sour, almost metallic whiff that seems to rise from the very bones of the city. People pass you, handkerchiefs to their faces, and you start noticing something strange. Everyone seems aware of the smell, but they're all reacting to different things. One man gags near a bakery. A woman swoons near a laundry drain. A child walks through it all unfazed, chewing on a hunk of bread like it's just another Tuesday. That's when you realize something deeper is at play. This isn't just a city that smells bad. This is a city terrified that its very air might be killing it. Welcome to the era of miasma theory, where science and superstition blend like perfumes at war. And spoiler alert, nobody's nose is safe. It begins innocently enough, well, as innocently as mass outbreaks of deadly diseases ever do. In the early 19th century, Europe is suffering waves of cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and other charming illnesses. And what do many doctors and scientists of the time think is the culprit? Bad smells. Not germs. Not bacteria, they haven't even been discovered yet. Nope, they think it's odor itself. Specifically, miasma, a sort of invisible vapor rising from decaying matter, waste, or even corrupt air. You can't see it, but you can definitely smell it. And if you inhale too much, well, you probably won't survive this. Under miasma theory, your nose becomes your doctor. If something smells rotten, that's not just unpleasant, it's potentially lethal. Historians still argue whether miasma theory actually helped or hurt sanitation efforts, since some of its assumptions accidentally led to cleaner cities. But no one doubts its power. Entire governments start acting like smell is an invading army. Paris, of course, goes all in. You pass a public health poster nailed to a cracked wall. It warns people not to walk near certain sores during hot weather. Another advises keeping windows closed during plague outbreaks, because air might leak death. You can't help but shiver, even though you know modern science would laugh at this now. Something about it still creeps into your lungs. Back then, every major outbreak brings a new wave of olfactory paranoia. And it's not just commoners falling for it, respected physicians start publishing thick, confident volumes about bad airs. Some describe how miasma travels on fog banks, or clings to the skin like oil. Others claim certain flowers can fight it. Lavender gets popular not just for smell, but for survival. You tuck that bit away in case you need to mask your own stench later. One particularly desperate city official once ordered piles of tar to be burned in the streets to purify the air. Imagine that, you're already choking on rot, and now someone adds boiling tar smoke to the mix. Sweet dreams. And then there's the vinegar. Everywhere you go, people are splashing it around, on doorsteps, in stairwells, even onto clothes. It's the 19th century version of hand sanitizer. French schoolteachers swore vinegar fumes kept children healthy. Housewives used it to demiasmatize laundry. Some paranoid souls even carried vinegar-soaked sponges in little lockets around their necks, sniffing them whenever they passed something suspect. Which, in Paris, is basically all the time. You enter a small apothecary, curious. The shelves are stacked with jars labeled things like camphor for vile air and cleansing spirits of turpentine. The apothecary offers you a tiny cloth mask dipped in rose oil. Protection, he whispers. You can't decide if you feel safer or just more ridiculous. The oddest part of all this? Miasma theory isn't entirely wrong. Not technically. While smell isn't disease, many of the places that stank the worst were, in fact, full of germs. Sewage and rotting flesh were harbingers of filth, and filth meant bacteria science just hadn't caught up yet. It's like using your nose as a canary in a coal mine, not foolproof, but sometimes tragically effective. Still, the social consequences get weird fast. People start associating certain smells with certain kinds of people. The poor, whose neighborhoods reek more often, are seen as contagious. Even if they're healthy, their proximity to bad smells makes them suspect. The upper class starts funding parks, not for nature's sake, but to air out the city. Fresh air becomes a luxury, like silk gloves or powdered wigs. You wander through one such park, still half wild. Children chase each other around a fountain, while their mothers sit stiffly on benches, fanning themselves with scented handkerchiefs. Every now and then, one of them wrinkles her nose and mutters quell horror at a passing fishmonger or laundry boy. It's not hard to see where this leads. If smell equals sickness, and certain people smell worse than others, well, prejudice starts hiding behind perfume. By the 1830s, multiple French laws regulate where certain trades can operate. No more slaughterhouses near schools. No more tanners in central Paris. That sounds progressive until you realize it's also a form of odor-driven segregation. Even architecture isn't immune. New homes are built with higher ceilings and better ventilation, not just for comfort but as a kind of defense system against foul air. Chimneys stretch taller. Windows grow wider. Some rich families even install indoor airing rooms filled with herbs, where they can detox after a walk outside. And yet, despite all the vinegar, all the burning herbs and scented gloves, the smells persist. Because, really, nothing's being fixed. The miasma theory may inspire fear, but it doesn't come with plumbing. People are still dumping chamber pots, animals are still dying in the streets, and the Seine, Paris's great central artery, is now more cesspool than river. Still, something is shifting. You feel it in the way officials talk, in the way neighborhoods get surveyed and inspected. The paranoia may be based on flawed science, but it's leading toward action. Smell, it turns out, might just be the city's downfall, and its salvation. You're heading south now, through a narrower street, where shadows stretch across the cobblestones like spilled ink. Somewhere behind you, someone empties a bucket out a third-story window. You flinch. Just water, this time. Probably. Then you notice something peculiar. The people walking around you all smell different. Some reek of unwashed socks and old cheese, yes, that's a thing. Others seem drenched in floral perfumes so aggressive they nearly sting your eyes. A few smell like wax and talc, others like sweat and soot. And suddenly it clicks. In this Paris, what you smell like isn't just accidental, it's a statement. This is where class warfare goes nasal. Because in 19th century Paris, the battle lines aren't just drawn by wealth, titles, or neighborhood. They're drawn in scent. The rich and the poor don't just look or live differently, they smell like they're from different planets. Perfume becomes your passport. If you can afford it, you coat yourself in the kind of fragrances that scream, "I'm not part of the problem." Lavender, rose, bergamot, bottled distractions from the grime outside. Some wealthier Parisians even hire scent specialists to design signature smells for their homes, so guests know they've entered an olfactory safe zone. You pause at a perfumery in the second arrondissement. Its window display is delicate, cut crystal bottles, white lace gloves, and handwritten notes promising air of the Alps and essence of Turkish breeze. You step inside, and the contrast nearly knocks you over. Outside, horse sweat and mold. Inside, a fantasy garden where nothing ever rots. The shop girl raises an eyebrow, probably clocking you as more street musk than eau de duchesse. But you're not here to shop. You're here to understand. See, it wasn't just about smelling nice. Perfume was a kind of class deodorant, something to erase the suggestion that you might, God forbid, be part of the city's general filth. Poorer Parisians couldn't afford perfume or the luxury of washing regularly. And so, their natural odors became associated with laziness, immorality, even criminality. Historians still argue whether these prejudices were rooted more in health concerns or social control, but the outcome was the same. If you stank, you sank. And it wasn't a small thing. You could lose job opportunities, marriage prospects, even your apartment if your scent betrayed the wrong social position. Landlords sniffed stairwells like bloodhounds. Mothers sniffed suitors like cheese. You pass a group of servants gathered outside a laundry depot, wringing water from steaming cloth. Their arms are red from scrubbing. The soap they use is pungent, but functional. No violets or jasmine here, just heavy-duty lye meant to beat the stink into submission. They don't wear perfume, but they still care about smell. Because in this city, even the working class wage war against their own scent. You make your way toward Les Halles, the massive central market. If you think modern supermarkets are overwhelming, imagine this: acres of meat, fish, cheese, produce, flowers, blood, and bees all mashed into a roaring, stinking carnival. A butcher waves you over with a bloody apron and a grin. "Good cut today," he says, holding up a questionable rabbit. You nod politely and edge away, nearly gagging on the blend of iron, salt, and something that might be liver. Here, the class lines blur a bit. Everyone smells something. No one escapes the chaos. But even here, subtle hierarchies exist. The wealthier clients have handkerchiefs, scented gloves, fans. The poorer ones just breathe through their mouths and hope not to pass out. You spot a group of middle-class women clustered around a fish stall. They dab perfume behind their ears while haggling for oysters. One of them has a tiny dog tucked into her shawl. It smells faintly of talcum powder and sandalwood. You wonder if it's bathed more often than some children in the 5th arrondissement. And just like that, you're reminded smell isn't just an indicator of wealth. It's a mask, a defense mechanism, a weapon. You remember that nobles used to carry pomanders, little orbs filled with cloves, ambergris, and other odor-masking goodies to survive walks through public streets. By the 1800s, these had evolved into vinaigrettes and perfume lockets. Basically, socially acceptable ways to say, I'm rich enough to not need to smell like you. The joke, of course, is that all these floral distractions are just fancy band-aids. They don't fix the sewage. They don't clear the cesspits. They don't scrub the blood from the gutters or the mold from the walls. But they let the elite pretend those things aren't there. There's even a bit of a perfume arms race going on. French perfumers begin crafting scents so strong they can last days on a single application. Not for romance, mind you. For survival. One popular concoction is said to mask the smell of horse dung for up to 12 hours. Another, alarmingly, includes whale vomit as a key ingredient. Don't ask. Even public buildings get scented. Theaters, banks, post offices all treated with floral spritzes or vinegar washes to make the space seem respectable. Sometimes it's overkill. You visit a church where the priest has gone overboard with frankincense. Half the congregation is asleep, and the other half look faint from smoke inhalation. One man sneezes 8 times before giving up and leaving. But smell doesn't just reveal class, it exposes urban neglect. You pass an alley where a blind beggar sits with a tin cup. He can't see your clothes, but as you walk past, he mutters, "Not rich." You blink, then realize he's judging by scent alone. And he's not wrong. There's a kind of brutal honesty in it. As the sun dips, the scents shift again. Warm bread, fried onions, tobacco. It almost smells bearable. But you know what's coming. As night falls and the city exhales, the sewage rises again. Windows open, chamber pots tip, horses relieve themselves on doorsteps. Still, you wonder, how long can a society last when half its citizens are drowning in filth and the other half are pretending it's someone else's problem? Change is coming. Slowly. Reluctantly. But the noses of the rich are starting to twitch. And soon, someone in power is going to decide they're done breathing everyone else's waste. You wake the next morning to a new smell, not quite floral, not quite putrid, but definitely bureaucratic. It's the scent of paper, ink, and the nervous sweat of mid-level officials. Because, believe it or not, Paris has finally decided to do something about the smell. And by do something, we mean, create a government office. Specifically, an entire bureau devoted to the investigation, analysis, and ideally removal of offensive odors. Welcome to one of history's most bizarre civic projects, the Bureau des Odors, the official Parisian Bureau of Smells. Yes, really. You pass the Hôtel de Ville, where men in stovepipe hats argue over maps dotted with red scent zones. These aren't tourist attractions, they're olfactory war zones, carefully documented based on frequency and intensity of public complaints. Imagine a city planning meeting where one agenda item reads, "Smells between Rue Saint-Denis and the Tannery Quarter have reached unacceptable levels of eye-watering." The Bureau wasn't always this formal. For years, City officials had vaguely addressed sanitation with half measures, temporary cesspit evacuations, scattershot vinegar washes, or laws about when chamber pots could be emptied. Spoiler, no one followed them. But by the mid-19th century, rising public health fears and scientific curiosity collided with political embarrassment. Something had to give. Enter the Odor Bureau. Its mission? To locate, log, and recommend action against dangerous or disruptive city smells. That included sewer leaks, rotting food, industrial byproducts, corpse gases, yes, and even smelly neighbors. You picture the first meeting, a bunch of well-meaning men sitting in a circle, sniffing folded cloths and trying to name what they just inhaled. Rotting eel? Burnt cabbage? Napoleon's ghost? Historians still argue whether the Bureau des Odors ever had teeth, or if it was mostly symbolic. Some say it was a genuine effort toward public health reform. Others insist it was political perfume, an attempt to quiet critics by pretending smell was under control. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. What's undeniable is that the Bureau marked a turning point. Paris was now officially acknowledging its own stink. The Bureau's staff included clerks, physicians, and, strangely enough, professional sniffers. These men, always men, of course, were tasked with patrolling neighborhoods and recording smell levels, often with poetic flair. One 1853 report describes a tannery district as having an aroma of damp beast and scorched hide, with gentle top notes of ammonia. Another likens the odor of the central market to summer fruit in advanced morning. You don't know whether to laugh or gag. You follow one of these so-called noses on his route. He walks briskly, coat tails flapping, stopping every few blocks to scribble notes in a leather journal. He peers into gutters, sniffs cellar doors, and occasionally mutters curses in Latin. When he finds something truly offensive, say, a pile of rotting potatoes mixed with dead pigeons, he marks the location on a map and files a formal complaint. But here's the weird part. There's no standard system for what constitutes a bad smell. It's all subjective. One official might find cheese unbearable, another might bathe in it. And that leads to chaos. Entire neighborhoods are flagged for odors that turn out to be nothing more than cultural cooking. One district full of North African immigrants receives multiple citations for volatile spice emissions. Another is targeted for drying fish on balconies. You see where this is going. Suddenly, smell isn't just about hygiene, it's about identity. Whose odor gets labeled as pollution? Whose scent gets erased? The Bureau quickly finds itself overwhelmed. For every source they identify, 10 more emerge. Sewer vents, leaking privies, decomposing trash, overcrowded cemeteries. And yet, they persist. Every day, these strange civil servants sniff the city's wounds like physicians trying to diagnose an infection. Some reports are surprisingly helpful. One leads to the discovery of a collapsed drainage pipe flooding a tenement basement with raw sewage. Another uncovers an illegal slaughterhouse operating beneath a pastry shop. You pause. So that's why the croissants tasted gamey. You find one of the Bureau's old ledgers, a thick tome with frayed edges and water damage that you hope isn't biological. The entries read like Gothic poetry. April 9th, Rue du Foin, sweetish stench with undertones of mildew. Suspect, decaying vegetable matter under cobbles. April 13th, Rue du Temple, odor so foul as to induce vomiting in both investigator and mule. Investigation postponed. And then the follow-ups. May 2nd, discovered ruptured corpse transport from hospital morgue. Resolved. The sheer weirdness of it all fascinates you. The city has weaponized noses. And while they're not always successful, they're committed. Imagine submitting a work report that reads, sniffed 7 alleys. Found 2 dead cats. Sent recommendations to council. Need new boots. But even this new effort faces public skepticism. Parisians joke about the sniff police. Caricatures appear in the papers, bureau agents with enormous noses, fainting over onions. One satirical headline reads, "Government declares war on smell, odors vow retaliation." Still, the idea catches on. Other cities start mimicking the model. London considers a smell surveyor. Berlin creates its own municipal stench watch. Suddenly, scent becomes a matter of international concern. You imagine diplomatic meetings where ambassadors compare odor maps over tea. And amid all the sniffing, one key question lingers. Can you ever truly deodorize a city built on rot? One bureaucrat thinks so. His name will pop up again later. He's young, ambitious, and obsessed with urban order. For now, though, he's just scribbling notes in the corner of a room full of smells. Because somewhere in this swirling perfume of decay and ambition, something larger is beginning to take shape. Paris is not just reacting to stink anymore. It's preparing to reinvent itself. One street at a time. One sniff at a time. The next time you spot one, he's standing awkwardly at the edge of a slaughterhouse alley, hat tipped forward, handkerchief pressed under his nose, notebook balanced against his knee. He's a scent inspector, one of the noses we met earlier, and he's on the job. You slow your steps, curious. He moves slowly, methodically, as if smelling is a kind of ritual. He inhales the air, flinches, and makes a small, tight note in his ledger. Then he moves 5 paces forward and does it again. It's like watching a detective search for clues, except the clues are invisible and gag-inducing. This is what passes for fieldwork at the Bureau des Odors. It's not glamorous. It's not heroic. But it's the city's best attempt at mapping the unspeakable. Each day, inspectors patrol assigned arrondissements, documenting odors like they're dangerous suspects. They wear heavy coats to guard against splashes and steam, and sometimes carry portable scent traps, little boxes lined with cotton to capture smells for later analysis. You try not to think too hard about what their laundry smells like. Your guide today is Inspector Chevement, a former apothecary who swapped tinctures for street work. He has a long, bony nose like a sundial and a voice that rarely rises above a sigh. Rue de Charenton, he mutters, jotting it down. Persistent sulfur with moldy leather undertones. Possible tannery runoff. Will advise counsel. You follow at a respectful distance as he navigates the sensory minefield of Paris. First stop, a dye works. The odor here is harsh, chemical, raw, almost metallic. Chevement winces, sniffs deeply, and mumbles something about aniline compounds. He's not just identifying smells, he's decoding them. And it's not just gross-out curiosity. The data matters. His notes go into weekly reports delivered to various municipal boards. Some odors get escalated if they're linked to known health risks or public complaints. Others are flagged for investigation by health inspectors or police. The system is chaotic, but it's real. What's most fascinating is how these smell inspectors develop their own language. A shared vocabulary, born of necessity. A butcher's stall is described as rich, meaty, with sour veal. A rotting canal bank. Wet parchment, sulfur bread. Some entries sound like bad poetry. Others read like a wine tasting gone terribly wrong. Still, not everyone respects the profession. You pass a group of boys who jeer as Chevement walks past. One yells, "Oi, what's that smell, Inspector? Your mother's cooking?" The others burst into laughter. Chevement doesn't even blink. He's heard it all before. People think what we do is ridiculous, he tells you later. Until their window faces a tannery. Then they want action. In fact, most Parisians don't realize how much the scent inspectors have quietly improved the city. Chevement shows you a map in his office, colored zones for odor complaints. Over time, The red areas have shrunk. Tannery fines, soap factory relocations, pressure on landlords to clean cesspits, it's working, slowly. One story sticks with you. The inspectors once traced a stomach-churning, eggy stench that plagued an entire district for weeks. People blamed butchers, beggars, even an unlucky laundress. But the real culprit? A ruptured underground glue pipeline from a defunct factory, quietly leaking gelatinous animal byproduct into the soil. The inspectors found it. Plugged it. The complaints vanished. You start to admire these noses, not just for their iron stomachs, but their persistence. They're not just cataloguing decay. They're fighting entropy. One sniff at a time. But the job has its dangers, too. Chevermont's colleague, Inspector Lemoyne, once passed out in a saw tunnel after inhaling methane-rich fumes. Another lost his sense of smell entirely after a close encounter with an improperly stored cadaver. And in one disturbing incident, an inspector's boots literally melted after stepping into an unknown chemical spill near a paint factory. There's no medal for this work. No fanfare. Just another week, another list of odors, another city council meeting where they argue about budgets while trying not to gag. Even the way these inspectors are treated by their superiors is complicated. On one hand, they're trusted with delicate sensory intelligence. On the other, they're considered low rank, a little ridiculous, a little embarrassing. Historians still argue whether the Bureau des Odors was meant as genuine reform or just a performative response to criticism. But when you walk the streets with them, there's no denying their importance. You begin to notice the subtle changes, a once rotten alley now faintly floral after the removal of a grease-rendering shop. A building that no longer leaks sewage after a tenant complaint sparked a visit from the Bureau. Each of these victories is invisible, but breathed in by everyone. And let's not forget the inspector's unique challenge. They're trying to document a momentary, unstable thing. Smell changes with weather, temperature, traffic, even the time of day. Morning might be briny and sour, afternoon more acrid and burnt. How do you regulate something that mutates hour to hour? You think back to Chevermont's notes. Strong odor at 7:15 a.m. Faded by noon. Return with team in 24 hours. It's part science, part art, and part masochism. As the day winds down, Chevermont sighs again and closes his notebook. Same again tomorrow, he mutters. You ask him why he does it, why devote his life to a city that smells like it's trying to fight him. He pauses, then shrugs. Because we're the only ones paying attention to what's right under everyone's noses. Later that week, you find yourself in a dimly lit chamber under the Hotel de Ville, humid, echoing, and strangely still. In front of you is a table. On it, bottles. Hundreds of tiny glass vials, each sealed with wax and tagged with handwritten labels. Some have dates. Others have street names. A few have nothing but ominous symbols drawn in ink. Welcome to the Bureau's smell archive. Yes. The odor bureaucrats of Paris weren't content to merely describe smells. They wanted to collect them. You watch a young lab assistant crack open one of the vials, ever so carefully. A soft pop, followed by a faint hiss, and then, the past floods the room. Not metaphorically. Literally. A sharp, moldy aroma wafts out, reminiscent of spoiled onions and wet canvas. Everyone recoils instinctively. One inspector gags. Another jots a note. Rue Mouffetard cellar leak, 1856. Still potent. This isn't just record-keeping. It's history via the nose. The Bureau believed that certain smells were cultural artifacts, worth preserving. If paintings showed what the 19th century looked like, and novels described what it felt like, these vials, they told you how it smelled. You peer at a shelf labeled Seine, Summer Collection. It holds samples of riverbank aromas from several years in a row. One smells like wet hay and fish heads. Another, disturbingly, has the top note of warm blood. And while this all feels like some macabre perfume boutique, the science behind it was surprisingly advanced for its time. The Bureau had begun collaborating with chemists, some real, some self-taught, who believed they could break down complex smells into base components. Early spectrometry didn't exist, so they relied on mixtures, distillations, and good old trial and error. One infamous experiment tried to recreate the scent of a decaying gutter in a laboratory to better study its effects on mice. The lab was condemned within a week. You ask the assistant why anyone would willingly bottle this chaos. He grins and shrugs. Proof, he says. You can't clean what you can't measure. But not all these vials are nasty. Some preserve the scents of bakeries, spice shops, vineyards in bloom. These weren't collected to target, they were archived out of respect. Even the Bureau understood that not all smells are crimes. Some are memories. Some are home. Still, it's the darker vials that get most of the attention. Officials used them to present evidence at council hearings. A particularly odious sample might be uncorked during a sanitation dispute, causing half the room to vomit and fast-track funding for new saws. And here's the most bizarre twist. Some scholars of the time began to theorize that smell could be used to predict social unrest. According to a fringe school of aroma politics, certain odors, particularly those linked to rot, stagnation, or overcrowding, preceded civil disturbance. Historians still argue whether this theory held any weight, or if it was just another way to police poor neighborhoods. But the Bureau took it seriously enough to assign sniffers to monitor at-risk zones after periods of summer heat or heavy rainfall. You imagine being part of one of those surveillance teams, climbing onto rooftops to catch a breeze from the garment district, or slipping into alleys near the fishmongers to monitor aroma spikes. What would that job even do to your brain? By now, Paris is starting to undergo larger changes, too. The Bureau's reports, odd as they are, feed into broader urban planning. Smell complaints get bundled into sanitation maps, which in turn influence building codes, saw routes, and market zoning. It's like odor is slowly becoming a blueprint. You stroll through one neighborhood flagged by the Bureau for chronic smell violations back in 1854. Today, it's been gutted, rebuilt, paved over. The old tanneries, gone. The fish drying racks, vanished. In their place, wide boulevards, trimmed trees, streetlights. You inhale. It's not exactly fresh, but it's no longer offensive. Some locals grumble about the change. They say it killed the soul of the place. That the smells were part of the city's rhythm, part of its truth. You think about that as you pass a perfumery that now stands where a soap boiler once cooked animal fat 24 hours a day. Progress smells different, they say. But not everyone agrees what that means. Back in the Bureau's archive room, an older inspector lets you peek at the most controversial file in their possession, a scent labeled Le Fantôme de Paris. The note reads, untraceable. Detected multiple times near Les Innocents. Description inconsistent. Vanishes on approach. It's become an inside joke. The ghost smell. The one they could never bottle. Some said it was a mix of flowers and rot. Others swore it smelled like wax and dust. Theories abound. It might have come from the old catacombs, or a cracked crypt, or a buried pestilence pit. But they never confirmed it. Maybe some smells just don't want to be found. You leave the archives with a new understanding. The Bureau wasn't just fighting stink, they were trying to map the invisible. They were chasing ghosts made of molecules, recording the intangible. You realize that one day, long after this era passes, all that will remain of many streets, many homes, many lives, is how they smelled. You wake up to a low rumble underfoot. Not thunder. Not wagons. This is something deeper, something vast. You step out and see workers in the street, jackhammers pounding, men shouting over dust clouds, and a thick rope of steam rising from a cracked manhole. Paris, it seems, has finally decided to rip itself open. This is the beginning of the sores, not just as scattered ditches or accidental dungeons, but as an intentional, sprawling underground system. And it will change everything, including the city's war on smell. You remember that young bureaucrat from earlier? Turns out, he has a name now, Baron Georges Eugene Haussmann. His title? Prefect of the Seine. His mission? To modernize Paris so thoroughly that even its stink becomes a footnote. Appointed in 1853 by Emperor Napoleon III, Haussmann isn't just building streets, he's building order. He wants symmetry, logic, beauty, and above all, cleanliness. Because Paris, in its current state, is not just smelly, it's embarrassing, dangerous, infectious. Haussmann sees the city's filth not only as a public health risk, but a political weakness. And so begins the most radical urban transformation the Western world has ever seen. You watch as entire neighborhoods vanish in a matter of months. Streets widened, slums flattened, tenements bulldozed, and beneath it all, a network of massive, modern sores, stretching like grey arteries under the city's skin. These are not your medieval cesspits. These are vaulted tunnels, grand, echoing, brick-lined passageways large enough to walk through. Some even boast sidewalks for maintenance crews. At their height, these tunnels can carry not only human waste, but runoff, industrial sludge, and yes, even corpses, though that's not the plan. The idea is simple: move the stink away. Flush it down, out of sight, and ideally, out of scent range. The engineers even design the system so that gravity does most of the work. No pumps. Just a steady downward slope, carrying Paris's worst instincts toward the distant Seine. Of course, this comes with its own horror show. You sneak down into the tunnels with a foreman, just for a peek. The air is wet, close, metallic. Sounds travel strangely here. Your footsteps echo like cannon fire. The smell? Oddly muted. Not pleasant, but no longer violent. The waste is contained now, channeled like venom through a fang. You pause as a rat scurries past the light of your lantern. Bigger than you'd like. Still, this feels controlled. Up above, Haussmann's streets take shape. Wide boulevards replace twisty, ancient alleys. Trees are planted. Gas lamps installed. Buildings are forced to conform to new architectural standards, uniform heights, clean facades, regulated spacing. The city becomes almost surgical in its beauty. But beneath that order lies the true revolution. Paris is no longer marinating in its own effluent. The smell begins to retreat. Not everywhere, of course. Poorer districts resist demolition, and many homes still rely on chamber pots or primitive privies. But the central arteries of the city, the heart of Haussmann's vision, now flow with relative freshness. And this is more than convenience. It's ideological. The sore becomes a symbol of modernity, civic pride. Paris even opens parts of it to public tours. You walk beside a group of curious nobles who descend with parasols and lace gloves to admire the engineering. They giggle. They cover their noses. But they're fascinated. This isn't just plumbing, it's proof that man can conquer stink. Haussmann doesn't do it alone. His chief engineer, Eugene Belgrand, is obsessed with hydraulics. He redesigns not just the sores, but the entire water system, aqueducts, reservoirs, fountains. He wants clean water to be available to every home, every tap. Not out of charity, but out of efficiency. If people can wash themselves, they'll stink less. If filth is flushed fast, it won't have time to ferment. Of course, there's opposition. Writers mourn the death of old Paris. Critics accuse Haussmann of aesthetic tyranny. And the displaced, thousands of poor families uprooted by demolition, are forced to the edges of the city, often into newer slums, where the saws don't yet reach. Still, the changes are undeniable. The Bureau des Odors begins to report drops in certain scent zones. Some of the worst red streets vanish entirely from the map. Even the inspectors find themselves reassigned, not because the smells are gone, but because the worst offenders are now buried beneath tons of brick and mortar. And yet, something curious happens. You hear it first from a baker, then a teacher, then a perfumer. They all say the same thing: the city smells too clean. It's not a complaint, exactly. More of a disorientation. Without the usual chorus of urine, smoke, vinegar, and fish, something feels off. People claim they can't recognize their neighborhoods anymore. One woman says she gets lost because the smell of bread no longer wafts from the corner shop. It's been relocated, sanitized, modernized. It turns out, not all smells are bad. Some are signposts, rhythms, memories. Paris is no longer screaming with its stink. It's humming, softly, beneath its breath. Haussmann's work will continue for years, decades, really. Some projects won't be finished until long after he's gone. But the seed has been planted. Smell, once ignored or feared, has become part of the planning process. And while the Bureau des Odors still exists, sort of, it no longer defines the city's nose. That job now belongs to engineers, to architects, to hydrologists, the new guardians of Paris's breath. You step out of the saw and into a freshly paved boulevard. A breeze carries faint traces of dust, horse sweat, and roasted chestnuts. You smile. It's not perfect, but it's something you can live with. You follow the scent of roasted chestnuts until it fades, replaced by something subtler. Warm iron, faint soap, and, beneath it all, a thin thread of coal smoke curling through the air like a lazy ghost. You're in a cleaner Paris now, or so it seems. But something's different. It's not just about saws or widened streets anymore. There's a shift in the nose of the city, a kind of perfumed diplomacy, a quiet battle for control over what Paris smells like, and who gets to decide. It begins with power. Not just political, but industrial. The Second Empire is in full swing, and with it comes steam, glass, coal, and chrome. Paris becomes a city of spectacle, train stations, department stores, glass domes. Progress, yes, but also pollution. You stand outside the new Gare de Lyon, watching a black train heave into the platform, spitting soot into the air like an angry dragon. A group of well-dressed travelers step out, dabbing handkerchiefs to their noses. The smell of industry is everywhere now: burnt oil, heated metal, charred fuel. And unlike rotting fish or open sores, this stench is considered modern, almost respectable. The city may not like the smell, but it tolerates it. Because industry means money. Trains mean access. Coal furnaces mean comfort. So, the rules of scent are shifting. You duck into one of the new Grands Magasins, those glittering department stores like Printemps and Le Bon Marché. The second you walk in, you're hit by a wave of manufactured aroma. Not decay, not nature, but something carefully designed. This is the rise of commercial scentscaping. Store owners realize that scent doesn't just hide bad odors, it guides behavior. So they perfume the air near silk displays, burn citrus oil near the cash registers, mist floral water into changing rooms. Why? Because these smells say, you are clean, you are safe, you should buy that parasol. And it works. Shoppers linger longer, spend more, and leave feeling fancier. Outside, on the new boulevards, perfume sellers set up kiosks. Their slogans are all variations of the same promise: smell like progress, smell like Paris, Even train stations start installing eucalyptus dispensers in waiting rooms, under the belief it calms passengers and refreshes the air. The irony, of course, is that Paris is still full of stink. The suburbs are overflowing. Riverbanks still rot. Pig farms on the outskirts pollute the wind. But within the haute quartiers, scent is now a performance. A costume. And yet, even this scented civility has its enemies. You overhear two old men grumbling in a cafe. Bah, one says. This city used to feel like something. Now it just smells like soap and lies. The other snorts. I liked the fishmonger on Rue Montorgueil. Smelled like real life. You realize there's now a generational divide. Old Parisians miss the chaos of scent, yes, even the bad ones. They claim it gave the city character, rhythm, honesty. New Parisians, meanwhile, embrace the sanitization. They breathe easier, literally and metaphorically. This tension isn't limited to citizens. Even scholars begin to take sides. Some sociologists argue that scent is becoming too artificial, too manipulated, turned into another tool of control. Others defend the change, citing lower death rates and improved public hygiene. Historians still argue whether this olfactory flattening was a form of elitist whitewashing, or an earnest step toward modern urban comfort. The Bureau des Odors, still limping along in a corner of City Hall, tries to adapt. They begin issuing new scent categories: industrial, domestic, atmospheric, and phantom, yes, phantom odors. The ones people report but can't prove. Smells that may or may not exist. It sounds ridiculous, until you remember that smell is memory's shadow. A ghost with no face. You sit in a new public library, recently opened, its floors still gleaming. A man nearby complains to a librarian that the reading room smells too clean, like bleach and silence. Bring back the ink, the glue, the must, he says. She just smiles. Progress, monsieur. You step outside and pause on a boulevard that didn't exist 20 years ago. The air is stiller than you expect. No butcher shouting. No horse droppings in sight. Just the faint hum of wheels and the whisper of perfume from a passing woman's scarf. It's nice. But you can't shake the feeling that something's been lost, too. Not everything has changed, of course. The lower districts still struggle. In parts of Montmartre or Belleville, the old smells linger: frying oil, coal smoke, sweat, cheap wine, wet stone. These neighborhoods weren't housemanned into submission. Their smells are honest, if not always pleasant. You wander through one such street, narrow and slanted. A bakery lets off a rich plume of caraway and rye. A fish stall wafts brine. Somewhere, someone is stewing cabbage too long. You wrinkle your nose, and smile. Here, the city still breathes in its old voice. Not everything has been perfumed into submission. As night falls, the scent shifts again. The perfume fades. Coal smoke sharpens. Cooking smells rise like prayers. Paris may no longer reek, but it still exudes. And even with its cleaned sewers, regulated industries, and rose-water-drenched shopfronts, this place, this maddening, evolving place, still knows how to smell like itself. The next morning, you wake to the low hum of voices echoing through a stone corridor. It's muffled, distant, but it's not above you. It's below. You follow the sound down an iron staircase, into the vaulted underbelly of the city. And then it hits you, literally. A warm gust of air thick with damp brick, engine oil, and something faintly reminiscent of boiled cabbage and rust. Welcome to the Paris Saw Tours. Yes, that's a real thing. And yes, people line up for it. By the 1860s, the new saws are such a point of civic pride that the city begins offering public visits. Not metaphorical, not theoretical, actual walks through the guts of Paris. You step into one now, flanked by curious tourists and an official guide wearing white gloves and a bored expression. The floor trembles slightly beneath your feet as runoff water sloshes by in stone channels. The smell? Manageable. Mostly. A bit like wet limestone that's been thinking about mold. Your guide begins. Here beneath your feet, he says, flows the very life of Paris. He gestures toward the murky stream beside you. What begins as filth becomes the future. We civilize the waste. You suppress a cough. Behind you, a woman fans herself with a pamphlet that reads, "Visit the wonders below." This isn't just urban planning. It's civic theater. You realize the city has turned its greatest former embarrassment into a spectacle of triumph. And it's working. Foreign dignitaries, engineers, and wide-eyed schoolchildren all descend into the tunnels, marveling at the vast arteries of brick and iron. In a sense, it's the ultimate revenge against the old smell, not just cleaning it, but showcasing the system that tamed it. Tourists take souvenir sketches of vaulted corridors. Engineers write love letters to the symmetry of the pipework. Even Victor Hugo, never one to miss a dramatic metaphor, devotes an entire chapter of Les Miserables to the Paris sores as a symbol of moral redemption. You pause at a junction labeled Collector Nord-Ouest. An iron plaque reads, "Built under the direction of E. Belgrand, 1867. You trace the raised letters with your fingers. Belgrand, the architect of the subterranean dream. His ambition wasn't just practical. It was philosophical. To him, water was civilization. Sewage wasn't a nuisance, it was raw evidence of life. If you could manage the flow of filth, you could manage the future. But not everyone agrees. Back up on the surface, whispers begin to circulate. Some say the tours are a distraction. That while Parisians marvel at tunnels and brickwork, the outer arrondissements rot in silence. That sores, for all their drama, still empty into the Seine, a river people still use for washing, fishing, even drinking. Historians still argue whether these tours were genuine civic transparency or performative misdirection. After all, the smells didn't vanish. They just got redirected. And the people? Well, you head east, past the tourist-friendly zones, toward areas the Bureau doesn't boast about. Here, the pipes are older, cracked, sometimes missing. The smell crawls back, slower now, but insistent. Like a dog that's learned to find the back door. You enter a tenement and speak to a housewife boiling water on a wood stove. She smiles tiredly and tells you that yes, the neighborhood has improved. But sometimes, especially after rain, the drains gurgle with something unspeakable. It rises, she whispers, like it remembers where it came from. Even the Bureau knows this. Internal memos refer to these fringe zones as persistent anomalies. Places where scent lingers despite best efforts. Where pipes clog, molds bloom, and the past refuses to go quietly. Still, progress presses on. Back downtown, the tours expand. A full exhibit is created, maps, models, preserved bricks. There's even a scent sample display, where curious citizens can sniff preserved odor jars and compare them to the present aroma. You watch one child recoil at Rue des Fleurs, 1823, then grin at Rue de Rivoli, 1869. It's bizarre. It's educational. It's peak Paris. Meanwhile, perfumers get in on the act. A niche market emerges, hygienic fragrances, scents designed to mimic cleanliness, not just beauty. Think, bleach with lavender, soap with mint, even a perfume called odor égaut, a cheeky blend meant to smell like a freshly cleaned sore. It's ridiculous. It sells out. Twice. You begin to notice a strange new truth. The memory of stink has become its own commodity. What was once reviled is now archived, joked about, even missed. The city, in a perverse twist, is nostalgic for its own former putrescence. One man you meet collects antique chamber pots. Another paints historical reconstructions of smell zones. There's even a society that reenacts the stink riots of 1832 with, thankfully, smell-free costumes. It's all very modern. Very Parisian. Very weird. But as you leave the tour, emerging into a square washed clean by last night's rain, you catch a familiar whiff somewhere between wet iron, ash, and old bread. It's not unpleasant. It's not glorious. It's honest. The city's stink has been scrubbed, redirected, bottled, toured, and even commodified. But it's still here, in the gaps, in the rain, in the stone. Because cities, like people, never truly lose their scent. They just learn how to wear it better. You wake to rain tapping lightly on the window, and for a brief, sleepy moment, you realize the smell is different again. Not foul. Not floral. Just real. Rain brings out the truth in cities. It lifts the layers. Dampens the pretenses. As you step outside, the scent hits you, wet limestone, earth, a ghost of coal smoke, distant bread rising somewhere you can't see. It's a reminder that no matter how much you scrub or scent or sanitize, Paris is still alive and living things always smell. Today, your guide is neither inspector nor engineer. It's a woman in a pressed uniform, carrying a clipboard and a canister strapped to her back. She's part of a new force in town, the Municipal Hygiene Patrol. No, not the old Bureau des Odors, this is a 20th century upgrade. Still government-backed, still concerned with scent, but now wrapped in the language of science and efficiency. Gone are the poetic nose reports. These workers carry instruments, devices to detect air particles, ammonia levels, sulfur traces. You shadow her through a narrow street near Les Halles. It's cleaner than it once was, but old habits linger. She pauses, clicks a sensor into action, and frowns. High organics, she mutters. Could be food waste behind that shutter. She sprays a citrus-based deodorizer, jots a note on her form, and moves on. It's oddly surgical. You think back to Inspector Chevement with his notebook and long sighs, and this feels colder, more clinical. Progress, perhaps. But progress often forgets to bring personality along. Still, it's all part of the bigger plan. By the early 1900s, olfactory control becomes central to how cities define themselves. Just like clean water, fresh air is now considered a right. Paris is no longer content with burying its filth, it wants to monitor, measure, and preempt it. So smell becomes data. You visit a lab in the 14th arrondissement where researchers expose vials of city air to color-changing filters. Some react to cigarette smoke, others to vehicle exhaust, factory output, or biological trace presence, which is a polite way of saying rotting stuff. It's a bizarre ballet of tubes and vials and beeping meters. One researcher hands you a chart titled, Urban Odor Incidents, 1908. You notice neighborhoods are now scored numerically, like schoolchildren graded on cleanliness. Saint Michel, 2.3, vegetal, mild. Belleville, 7.6, organic, volatile. Le Marais, 4.2, mixed heritage, intermittent anomalies. It's hard not to laugh at the absurdity. A city famous for revolution, art, and heartbreak now charts its success in decimal cent points. But this is where things get complicated. Because while the numbers seem objective, smell is still deeply political. Who decides what constitutes clean air? Who gets inspected most often? Who is allowed to carry their culinary traditions into the streets? And who is fined for olfactory disturbance? In immigrant-heavy neighborhoods, complaints spike. One inspector confides that the term foreign odor shows up far too often in citizen reports. It's not about safety, it's about bias. You hear about spice shops cited for unapproved aromatic emissions, street vendors targeted for stewing too close to apartment windows. The city claims neutrality, but scent is never neutral. Historians still argue whether early 20th century scent laws were tools of hygiene or tools of assimilation. Likely, they were both. Paris wanted to smell like Paris, but only a very specific version of itself. You stand on a market street in Bob's, watching a woman lay out piles of cumin, turmeric, and preserved lemons. The aroma is glorious sunlight trapped in spice. But across the street, a man covers his nose and shakes his head. The war on smell is no longer just about sewage. It's about identity. At City Hall, internal debates rage: how to protect public hygiene without flattening cultural richness. Some reformers argue for scent inclusion zones. Others push back, demanding stricter enforcement. It's a tug-of-war between order and authenticity, between nose and nuance. Meanwhile, perfume houses flourish. In a twist of irony, while the city suppresses certain undesirable smells, it celebrates others with wild abandon. Chanel, Guerlain, and Coty rise to power in this era not just as beauty brands, but as arbiters of scent-based class. You tour a perfume factory where distillers speak of top notes, base notes, sillage. The very vocabulary of luxury is borrowed from the noses of old. Except now, smell is art. It's curated, bottled, priced. You test a scent called Sous les Ponts de Paris under the bridges of Paris. It's meant to evoke river mist and youth. You're told it contains hints of ozone, cedar, and synthetic dampstone. Synthetic. Controlled. A memory of rot scrubbed clean and sold in crystal. You can't help but notice the irony. The same smells once hunted through alleys and saws are now reimagined as nostalgia. Bottled filth. Elegant decay. And back on the streets, the patrol continues. They deodorize bus stops. They find cafes with poorly vented kitchens. They sniff, test, record, and occasionally shrug. But you start noticing the unregulated pockets, moments where Paris breathes in its old voice. A boulangerie at 4 a.m. A metro tunnel in August. The inside of an old hat shop on Rue de Grenelle. Smells no patrol can flatten. No meter can rate. You realize, for every sanitized breath, there's still a whisper of history. Somewhere in the stone, the sweat, the steam, Paris remembers. And somehow, so do you. By the time the 1920s swing into gear, Paris is shedding its old skins again. The war has left a bruise across the city, quiet in places, loud in others. You feel it most in the way people walk faster now, or how the laughter at cafes feels a little forced. Still, one thing hasn't changed: the smells. If anything, the air is more complicated now. Not necessarily worse, just busier. You start your morning near the Gare Saint-Lazare, watching porters haul crates of oranges and telegram machines past passengers in cloche hats and belted coats. A passing breeze hits you with a mix of cologne, citrus, coal ash, and the wet dog musk of steam trains. Paris is no longer the city of piss and fish. It's now the city of mechanical breath and mingled perfumes. But underneath the flapper gloss and Art Deco signs, the scent wars continue, just more subtly. City planners, now part of modern hygienist councils, begin pushing for olfactory zoning laws. Yes, zoning. As in, this street may smell like fresh bread, that one must not smell at all. Certain activities, pickling, smoking fish, rendering fat, are pushed farther to the outskirts. The new word for it is externalization. The less polite version, exile by odor. And so, once again, the city gentrifies by the nose. You visit a butcher in the 11th arrondissement who's been fined for excessive meaty emanation. He shows you his citation with a shrug. "I've smelled worse perfumes," he jokes. "But the hurt is there. He's lived and worked on this corner for 30 years. Now the building next door is an accountant's office that wants a cleaner profile. Meanwhile, inside homes, the smellscape changes in ways you never expect. The 1920s see the rise of home sanitization products, bleaches, disinfectants, sprays. Smell becomes private, something to manage behind closed doors. You peek into a shop selling Scentco odor shields for the modern kitchen. Bottles with labels like "No More Onion" and "Goodbye Garlic" line the shelves. Housewives attend demonstration nights where vinegar and cabbage are banished with a single spritz. One bottle proudly advertises, "Erase your dinner." Even apartment design begins to reflect this shift. Kitchens are tucked farther from parlors. Garbage chutes appear in buildings, designed to isolate smells. Smell is no longer part of domestic life, it's the enemy of it. But not everyone agrees. You follow a young man into a narrow building in Montparnasse where artists gather. Inside, the air is thick with turpentine, cigarette smoke, unwashed wool, and black coffee. He grins. "We like our city alive." His name is Claude. He's painting a piece he calls Odeur du Dimanche, the smell of Sunday. It's just blotches of ochre and grey, but he says it's about stew, steam, and the warmth of shared breath. Others are doing the same. Writers like Colette and Proust describe scent not as a nuisance, but as memory's gatekeeper. A whiff of Madeleine, a trace of rose soap, a forgotten jacket pocket, each one a key to an entire lifetime. In fact, you come across a small pamphlet passed around by intellectuals. To erase a smell is to erase a truth. The world is not clean, and neither are we. You think about that as you pass a bakery now required to vent its ovens away from the street. The scent still seeps through. You smile. Resistance, in buttered form. But the hygienists are winning elsewhere. The Bureau des Odors, mostly ceremonial now, is absorbed into the Office of Public Atmospheres, an agency tasked with managing not just smell, but air quality, dust levels, pollen tracking. It's a new world, more precise, more bureaucratic, but maybe less human. The inspectors still exist, though they're more likely to be chemists now than poets. They carry clipboards, wear pressed coats, and write reports like, "Zone C for exhibits 0.0047 ppm of mercaptans, recommend bi-weekly neutralization." And somewhere in this data fog, Paris loses something. It doesn't happen all at once. Just gradually, as more things smell the same. Bleach. Soap. Rain on concrete. The scent of oranges replaced with the idea of citrus in aerosol form. Coffee replaced by cafe-flavored syrup pumped through bright metal tubes. Still, there are pockets. Always pockets. A metro station in the middle of August. The wood polish in a chapel pew. A market stall selling roast chestnuts under a broken canopy where no sanitization system reaches. You pause one night by the Pont Neuf, leaning on the stone railing as the Seine rolls slowly beneath. The air is cool, touched with algae and iron and just a whisper of diesel. Behind you, laughter drifts from a cafe where someone's ordered snails swimming in butter. The whole city exhales. It doesn't stink. But it's not sterile either. Just real. Honest. Earned. And as you stand there, you realize, for every law passed, every smell chased away or bottled up or chemically rewritten, Paris is still full of ghosts. Not the haunting kind. The aromatic kind. They linger in the stone, in the drains, in the folds of a coat worn in the rain. And when no one's looking, they rise again, just long enough to remind the city of who it's always been. You find yourself back in the archives, not the old damp ones beneath the Hôtel de Ville, but a sleek, modern library tucked behind a glass wall in the 7th arrondissement. It's called the Musée de l'Odeur, the Smell Museum of Paris. Yes, really. A whole institution dedicated to how the city has smelled, past, present, and possibly even future. The first exhibit greets you with a low, mechanical hiss, and then a sweet, dusty scent wafts from a hidden vent. Paris 1871, after the siege. It's a simulation, based on historical records and lab reconstructions. You detect smoke, mildew, old leather, and something disturbingly close to cooked horse meat. You wince. But you're fascinated. Here, smell is no longer a nuisance or even nostalgia, it's heritage. You move slowly through the exhibits, each labeled by decade and major event. 1789, sour wine, sweat, gunpowder. 1944, diesel, wet cement, and nervous cologne. Even May 1968 has its own entry: tear gas, damp protest banners, the sharp tinge of adrenaline. It's surreal. A timeline of revolution, romance, and rot captured in nothing but air. And it makes sense. Because smell was never just background. It was witness, companion, evidence. A curator tells you they're now working with neuroscientists and perfumers to recreate extinct smells using volatile compound analysis and AI predictions. "We've got a whiff of Marie Antoinette's gloves," she whispers proudly. "Based on rose oil, civet, and old glove leather." You wonder what she'd think of that. And while this museum is groundbreaking, you know it's only the latest layer. The real story of Paris and smell is still happening, right now, in the living streets. So you go back out. It's the 1980s now. Cars hum louder. Fast food restaurants flicker into view. A chain called Quick opens near the Louvre, and for the first time, the smell of frying oil and ketchup mingles with centuries of bread, tobacco, and stone dust. And Paris isn't sure how it feels about that. There are protests, mild ones. Letters to editors. Angry shopkeepers who claim a single cheeseburger joint can unravel the olfactory legacy of the block. Historians still argue whether this pushback was about authenticity or snobbery. Probably both. Meanwhile, air pollution becomes the new villain. It's not smellless, not really. You can tell the air is different, heavier, metallic, with a slight peppery burn in the throat on bad days. The Seine starts foaming again in places. Birds leave. And suddenly, the war on smell feels like it's reversed. Where once the danger was too much scent, now it's the absence of breathable air. You hear about asthma rates rising, black mold in council housing, strange chemical scents floating over from industrial zones in the north. The old Bureau des Odors might have been disbanded, but its ghost lingers in the form of environmental watchdogs and citizen action groups who patrol neighborhoods with handheld meters and clipboards. The city begins tracking smell alerts, tied to emissions and factory leaks. Maps are drawn again, this time color-coded for toxicity. The new enemy isn't garbage or guts, it's invisible. And through it all, perfume endures. Even thrives. You attend a talk by an aging perfumer who laments that everything now smells like citrus cleaner and over-designed branding. "We've lost the bass notes," he sighs. "Nobody wants mystery anymore. Just marketing." Yet at the same time, the niche scent movement rises. Independent houses pop up, crafting perfumes that smell like old libraries, wet sidewalks, burnt toast, even metro seat fabric. You smell one called Cigarette in Church, it's terrible, and kind of brilliant. Clearly, the city isn't done exploring its nose. And neither are its people. You speak with a group of students creating an olfactory walking tour of the left bank spots where the scent tells you more than the plaque. A mossy staircase, a laundromat's steamy breath, a corner where pigeons have ruled since the Second Empire. One girl says, "Smell is what Paris leaves behind when no one's looking." You nod. That feels right. And as the sun sets, you wander through Belleville again. A family grills meat on a balcony. A bakery down the hill tries out a new fig and honey loaf. Somewhere nearby, someone's burning incense. You breathe it all in. The city doesn't smell clean, or dirty, or modern, or ancient. It smells like layers, like life, like Paris. The air is different again, but now it's too clean, sterile, artificial. You step off the RER at Châtelet-les-Halles in the early 2000s, and the station smells like nothing. Not stone, not oil, just recirculated air, like a shopping mall under anesthesia. Paris has entered the era of scentless efficiency. Thanks to decades of regulation, filters, and urban redesign, the public spaces you move through no longer carry the same weight. The metro, filtered. The libraries, climate-controlled. The new electric buses, practically odorless. Even the public toilets, once Paris's most reliable stench sources, now emit gentle puffs of automated citrus mint mist every 6 minutes. You watch one reset like a spaceship pod. It's impressive. It's hygienic. It's a little unsettling. Because while the war on bad smells has been largely won, something else has been lost along the way: the city's ability to whisper its story through your nose. You sit on a bench near Place de la République. A businessman walks past in a cologne cloud so digitally calibrated it probably has a startup behind it. A woman with lavender-scented earbuds, yes, they're real, scrolls through her playlist titled Clean Vibes. Even the wind carries little, filtered through the rows of trees planted in soil treated to suppress mold. You start to wonder, have we overcorrected? You meet a man named Alan who works in olfactory mapping, a new field where researchers chart not just where things smell, but how people feel about those smells. He pulls up a tablet showing a colorful grid of Paris neighborhoods rated by emotional scent impact. The Tuileries, rated calm dry herbal. Pigalle, dynamic warm metallic. La Défense, sterile cold neutral. You blink. Scent, now, is an experience economy. Tourism boards begin marketing Paris not by landmarks, but by olfactory trails. You're handed a brochure with titles like The Pastry Path, The River Breeze Route, and Underground Musks, a Soar Heritage Walk. They're Monetizing smell again. But this time, it's curated, polished, sanitized. There's a new startup offering smell subscriptions. A little device plugs into your phone and emits a daily scent programmed to your mood, your neighborhood, your digital calendar. It's equal parts dystopian and fascinating. Their bestseller? Paris Morning 1892. A reconstructed scent featuring horse sweat, bakery yeast, tobacco, and street soap. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. You attend a public forum in the Latin Quarter. The topic: scent gentrification. A term once reserved for rising rents now includes rising air purity. Longtime residents argue that the neighborhoods have lost their warmth, their edges, their truth. One speaker says the city smells too polite. Another counters, it smells like safety, like progress. The debate rages on. Historians still argue whether the city's current smellscape is a triumph of civilization or a whitewashed shell. Are we healthier? Yes. More comfortable? Sure. But is something ancient and essential quietly suffocating beneath all the citrus and sterilization? You duck into a hidden alley in the Marais and find an old record store that smells exactly like it did 40 years ago. Dust, cardboard, vinyl, and a trace of mildew. The clerk doesn't even look up as you breathe it in like a time traveler. Later that night, you meet a collective of scent artists, yes, that's a thing now, who describe themselves as olfactory rebels. They design installations that emit smells banned or ignored: hot metal, mossy stone, expired brie, metro upholstery. One artist says, "We want to bring back the city's depth. Its sweat. Its heartbreak. Its breath." And maybe they're right. Because even though no one misses the rot of open sores or the eye-watering sting of fermented blood, it's clear. Paris is meant to be smelled, not just seen or heard. You board a late-night tram and realize the windows don't open. The air inside smells like filtered air trying to smell like nothing. You lean your head against the glass and close your eyes, remembering the vinegar haze of Les Halles in summer, the yeast-rich dawn outside a Montmartre bakery, the incense inside St. Sulpice, the faint mildew of a rain-soaked bookstall by the Seine. These scents weren't always pleasant, but they were true. They were the city's voice, humming under its breath. You step off at your stop and walk home through a courtyard where the wind still manages to pick up the scent of jasmine vines and wet brick. Just for a moment, the city feels alive again. Because no matter how much you polish it, no matter how many filters you install or algorithms you consult, Paris will always carry traces of itself in the air, in corners, in basements, in alleyways, and stairwells. The fight against smell was never about scent alone. It was about memory, about identity, about who belongs and who doesn't. And as long as there are people walking these streets, sweating, eating, laughing, and yes, even stinking a little, the real Paris will never fully fade. You wake to the low hum of distant traffic and something unusual, silence in your nose. It's early 2020s now, and you're staying in a smart hotel in the 6th arrondissement. The air is digitally scrubbed. The bedding smells like algorithm-approved lavender. Even the minibar emits no scent, not from the cheese inside, nor the plastic packaging. You check the settings on your room panel: airflow, quiet, fragrance, subtle freshness, humidity, optimized. The future has arrived. And it barely smells at all. You walk outside, mask in your pocket, because, yes, that's part of the picture too now. COVID-19 altered not just daily life but the entire sensory contract of the city. For a time, the world went quiet. Streets emptied. Restaurants closed. Public transport echoed. And suddenly, with factories slowed and engines silenced, Paris began to smell again. You talk to people who remember it vividly, how spring 2020 brought back the scent of wet trees, clean rain, even soil. It was like the city was breathing for the first time in decades, someone says. You smile. Because despite everything, quarantine, fear, change, the nose knew. And it still does. Today, Paris is a city divided not by wealth or language or even politics, but by its relationship to scent. Some residents demand more fragrance, cleaner metros, fresher air, smarter city smells. Others push for authenticity, bakeries that vent openly again, markets that dare to wreak a little old smells in new contexts. You pass a kiosk selling olfactory memory cards, tiny vials labeled Rue Mouffetard, 1976 or Gare du Nord in winter. You sniff one and instantly recall standing on a platform in the cold, the scent of hot brakes, old upholstery, and the woman beside you wearing too much Chanel. And then there's the schools. In a classroom near the Sorbonne, students take part in a new program, History of the City by Smell. They write essays about how neighborhoods evolved by their olfactory signatures. They interview grandparents about what Paris used to smell like. They build scent diaries. You read one entry: I remember my grandfather's bakery before they changed the ovens. He always said the smell of yeast was the sound of the morning. It hits you harder than you expect. Because despite the censors and the zoning and the endless attempts to bottle, filter, curate, and erase, it's memory that survives. Smell is memory in motion. That's the secret. The thing no regulation could ever quite suppress. You catch a bakery on Rue des Martyrs that still opens its back window. You walk past a metro grate on Boulevard Saint-Michel that exhales hot, dusty breath. You find an old jazz bar near Pigalle that still smells of beer-stained carpet and cigarette ghosts. And in those moments, Paris isn't just alive. It remembers itself. Because while the old Bureau des Odors is long gone, the instinct behind it remains, to understand this city not just by what it looks like, but by what it smells like. By the air it moves through. By the trace it leaves on your coat. Historians still argue whether the whole experiment, from inspector reports to smell-free trains, was an act of genius or folly. A hygienic miracle or an aesthetic tragedy. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But you know this. The streets may have changed. The pipes may have been sealed. The laws may have been passed. But Paris, Réal, breathing Paris, still lives in your nose. And if you ever doubt that, just wait for rain. Just step into a bakery before sunrise. Just stand under a metro vent in July. It's all still there. Waiting. Just beneath the surface. So now, as you lie back, blanket up to your chin, lights down low, you let that final thought drift. The smells of cities are like lullabies from the past. Soft. Strange. Sometimes sweet, sometimes not. But always honest. You imagine a quieter Paris now, late at night. No horns. Just the tap of occasional footsteps on cobbled stone, the distant clink of dishes being dried in an upstairs kitchen, the last notes of an accordion fading down an alley. And through it all, drifting like a whisper, the scent of the city remembering itself. A bakery cooling. Rain against limestone. Soap from an open window. Maybe a glass of wine left half-finished on a cafe table. You don't need to chase these smells. They find you. They rise from the cracks. From history's coat pockets. From the folds of the city's worn coat. They remind you of life, messy, unpredictable, beautiful. They remind you that cities are living things. And that, no matter how many layers of progress we pile on, the truth still lingers, in the air. So take a slow breath. Let it settle. And know that somewhere, beneath the perfume and the politics and the perfect urban plans, Paris still exhales. Just like you do now. Softly. Sleepily. Full of memory. Full of dreams. Full of life. Good night.